What's the most creepiest thing you've seen that you weren't supposed to see? I was 8 and watched my friend's dad beating the shit out of him from my treehouse. Looking back, it's no wonder he was the class clown. People loved him at school. While working in a level 1 trauma center, calibrating medical x-ray equipment, I was in the emergency room, hearing noises, voices, normal stuff. Anyway, I heard this kid crying, screaming at the top of his lungs. Sound like pretty powerful lungs. I was guessing a high school age? Everyone was moving fast as they normally do, however they had looks on their faces of deep concern. When one of the techs I knew well had a moment, I asked, guessing a kid fell out of his treehouse. The tech shook his head and claimed, "That's no kid in there. That's a full-grown man who was riding his motorcycle and came in, some assembly required." I couldn't resist. A 200-pound man at over 6 tall in black Harley-Davidson leather. He lost his arm above the elbow and one of his legs was twisted around completely backwards. A visual I will never get out of my head. That much blood, you can physically smell the iron in the air. That's what I get for looking. Used to fly the helicopter for a level 1 trauma center. The loudest screamers are usually bike crash victims with broken collarbones. Hurts, apparently a lot, but not too injured to really get some power into the screaming. Seriously messed up people don't scream at all. As a kid I was walking through the woods when on holiday. I was only following the river up and down so I couldn't get lost. I saw a tarpaulin through the trees and thought I would go check it out. As I got close, someone I couldn't see said turn around and keep walking, which, unsurprisingly, I did. At a run. When walking back along the river the next day, the tarp was gone. I saw a lady moving big blue chemical barrels into a garage. There was at least 20 in there and she saw me and closed her garage. Drove by an hour later, garage open, all barrels gone. I'm a sales rep and was looking for a meeting room in a rural hospital's pathology department and got lost. I started opening doors to find someone who could help me. When I opened one door, there was a primate of some sort, not human, that was suspended by its wrists that had all of its skin flayed off. Presumably it was a primate cadaver being used for anatomy lessons, but it scared the shit out of me. The skin was removed from the skull, but the eyeballs remained, so it appeared to be staring at me as I entered the room. Pathology departments in small-town hospitals are creepy as hell. I was driving to a Jimmy Buffett concert in Pennsylvania back in 2007 with my brother and 2 friends. We were just driving along and saw a 4-door sedan in the right-hand lane about half a mile in front of us swerving. Figured maybe they were going to the concert and pre-gamed a little too much. Anyway, my brother decides to pull up on them and see what we can see. As we are approaching, we see handfuls of papers being thrown out the passenger window. Confused, we speed up and are just about to pass them on the left. We see a couple in their 50s in the car. The husband, who is driving, is just throwing haymakers at his wife right to her face in the passenger seat as he's driving. Time feels like it stood still for a minute. We are driving alongside with me in the passenger seat, window rolled down, flailing my arms around and yelling, trying to get the guy's attention. Remind you, we are going 55 mph. Another car comes up behind us and we actually manage to block the dude in and slow him down. Meanwhile, my friend in the back seat is on the phone with 911 trying to get a cop out there. Long story short, we end up slowing the car down to a slow crawl and cops show up within what seemed like a minute. Cops took our statements and arrested the dude. It was a pretty quiet ride the rest of the way to the concert. I have been asked many times on here what a haymaker is. Imagine winding up with your arm and hitting something or someone as hard as you can. In this case, trigger warning, the man was driving and holding onto the wheel with his left hand, taking his right fist across his body to the left, almost touching the driver's side window with his fist and swinging it across his body towards the passenger seat headrest from 9 to 3 on a clock. However, in a car you are mostly at the same height and this poor lady's face was taking all the contact. My story is like this. Early 90s, my stepdad was driving and my mom, myself and my little brother were in the car. Saw someone roll what I thought was a bloody, dead body out of the car ahead of us. My mom dropped my stepdad off and took us kids to go find a payphone to call the police. We were terrified. The police and ambulance showed up. The woman was brutally beaten. She lived. Her boyfriend tried to kill her. Man, I live in pretty rural Russia and like everybody else in the neighborhood we had a guard dog. It got poisoned, died. A couple weeks later one night I hear a car pulling into our driveway and right in front of our house. My room had a window facing the road and the rear were no lights turned on. I just peeked at them for what felt like an hour but was probably just 5 minutes, decided to shine my phone's flashlight on them and they instantly drove away. Scary as shit. A few years ago I still lived in my parents' house. It was about 11 p.m. and our dog started barking viciously. The dog is only able to move around in the backyard, and normally he would bark at cats in the front yard, but something about his bark was different, so I walked to the window to see what was going on. I looked out and saw a man looking through the same window. We both froze and after a few seconds he ran off. A few weeks later when we came home after work all our electronics and expensive stuff was gone. When I was 15 me and a buddy were hiking along the Merced River to our fishing spot when we were stopped on the path by 3 guys with ball caps and bandanas covering their faces and holding shotguns. They told us to turn around and go back, which we did without question. Was very strange since we'd been down there dozens of times and had never seen them before or after this. Found out a few months after that there was a clampers rally happening on the property of a guy who lived down there and there were guards. When I was a kid I was walking to my house in Atlanta, from my school, and between 2 buildings there were about 3 gang members beating the crap out of this guy. The guy was on the ground with blood around his head. One of the gang members saw me and walked over to me. He was wearing an orange ski mask, which he pulled off. He got on one knee so he was on my level. This massive black guy stares me straight in the eyes and says, "This is a bad guy, we're teaching him a lesson, okay?" I nodded very fast. I was so scared. He smiled at me and said, "Don't tell anyone you saw, okay? This is our secret." I nodded again. "Go home now, okay?" I nodded and took off running. I ran all the way home and just sat on my porch shaking. I realize now that the fact he took off his mask was to make me feel less scared, but if he was a different person, he could have taken off his mask because he didn't care if I saw his face because he was going to kill me. I was in a shitty hotel in Paris many years ago when I heard a commotion down on the street. I opened my window and saw 2 guys knock another guy off a moped and start beating the shit out of him. I don't speak French so I don't know what they were yelling at him. After a few minutes they made a phone call and a car showed up. They stuffed him in the trunk and drove off. Left the scooter though. I closed my window and noped back into my dark room. I was backpacking on the trail staying in one of the multi-story shelters. Basically a barn. A little background is these shelters are notoriously overrun by rodents, so you need to store food/hygiene stuff in a tree. You share the barn with like 5 to 10 strangers and it's usually a fun way to make new friends. Anyway I was up in the loft and woke up to a thudding noise. I thought I imagined it but it happened again every 2 to 4 minutes. I peek my head down the ladder and there is a dude sitting there super still with a red light headlamp pointed down at some peanut butter crackers. A rat goes to get some cracker and he slams a knife into it and piles it onto a stack of dead rodents. I was creeped out but the dude turned out to be chill and made everyone coffee the next morning. He totaled 13-ish rats. We had a funeral pyre with him. I saw a pimp shooting up a hooker in a car then pushing her out into the street in Washington, D.C. I'm a medic. About 2 years ago we got called to a woman in the middle of nowhere on the roadway. She had called 911 from a cell phone with no other service. She is completely altered, can only tell us her first name and didn't even know what state she was in. She thought she was in Florida, there was snow on the ground, only one other number in the phone. We call it from another phone and a guy answered and I don't remember exactly what was said but basically told us he didn't know her but he'd come get her. We knew something wasn't right but it took a little bit to figure it out. After a little bit I realized this girl had been trafficked and they were done with her. They shot her up with some drug cocktail and dumped her on a rural road in winter. We took her to the hospital and no one had any idea what to do with her once she was treated. Later found out a woman showed up claiming to be her friend and wanted to take her. Hospital wouldn't let her thankfully and police sat with the patient for protection. This happened a few times in the next month. Someone was cleaning house. Never found out any more beyond that though. Had to go to a co-worker's apartment to retrieve office equipment and files, because he had died suddenly of a heart attack the night before. When I got there he was still in his recliner, the funeral home hadn't picked him up yet. I was not a happy puppy that day. Post-edit for clarity, this happened in late afternoon. The office management had contacted the apartment management where he lived when there was no contact from him. Coworker was always early to arrive. Superintendent went to check, heard TV, no answer, so used his key. Early 1990s when you could still do that. When I was little, me and my family lived over 20 kilometers from a city in the woods. We had a nanny stay with us when our parents were away. Once when only me, my sister, we were around 8 years old, and Nanny were home while playing outside, we saw a bunch of people emerge from the forest nearby and walk slowly like zombies towards our house. They tried climbing the fence, but they were too out of it to accomplish such a task. The nanny called our mom and she drove home from the city and took us all to our grandparents. We later found out that there was some drug-infused party going on not too far from our home and 2 people died from overdosing, 1 from stab wounds there. To this day I feel super grateful that they were too tired or drugged out to get past our fence that day and police was able to apprehend the ones that stayed around long enough. My uncle was babysitting me when I was about 9 and so I went to work with him for the day. He was a landlord for some buildings in a city at the time and got complaints that an elderly woman hadn't been seen in a few days from the neighbors. She was on the ground floor and I think the door may have been locked from the inside with a chain or something, but he had me climb in through the window to open the front door for him. My naturally curious self crawled through the window and instead of going straight for the front door I followed an awful smell towards the bedroom and found this lady face up on the ground dead. The place was a mess so I didn't immediately associate the bad smell with death, but I bolted to the front door and watched them take her away in the ambulance. I don't know any legal answers here and I never really talked about it. Weird day. I didn't see it so much as heard it. I was the first appointment of the morning at my dermatologist's office and was sitting in the corner out of view of the receptionist's desk. The doctor came up to her behind the counter and started reaming her out, cussing etc. about some situation I couldn't understand, but he was actually yelling and super nasty. Then not 10 seconds later, he opens the door and comes out doing a jig and whistling and all do-dee-do-dee-do. Aw shucks, good morning Miss Annabelle. Do-dee-do-dee-do. Like he usually did. I had whiplash from the 180. I stopped seeing him because the transformation was seriously scary. A few years ago the wife and I were searching for our first home. I was in the basement of one of the places that we were looking at, and somehow noticed a light switch that seemed out of place. I was flicking the switch as my wife and agent came down the stairs. My agent noticed a bit of light coming from underneath the drywall framing the stairs. With a little further inspection I found a very tiny passage between the foundation wall and the back side of the stairs. Said passage opened up into an undisclosed renovation that was a sub-basement room, that was completely rubberized with an industrial hose and shower head. Walls, ceilings and flooring was all rubber. It was 100% a secret murder room. My agent called the cops and 48 hours later the listing was removed and the home had police tape around it. A drunk idiot got hit by a car right in front of me in the middle of the night in the middle of freaking nowhere. His condition was unstable. The trauma helicopter, with trauma team OFC, was needed. I was holding a sheet with another person so onlookers wouldn't see what was happening, and well, it wasn't pretty at all. Ever heard ribs crack due to CPR? And his lung collapsed or it was filling with blood, not sure. But the trauma doctor opened up his chest right in front of me. I do not have any medical background and well, I've seen things that night that I wasn't supposed to, but it did give me more appreciation seeing those professionals in action basically performing surgery right in front of me. Was rather impressed by how methodical they were and their cool-headedness. On my way home, I was looking at a busy street from the subway platform I was on and I saw this guy that everyone knew as a scammer in the neighborhood. He'd throw himself in front of cars for money. But that day he threw himself in front of a real nice car and it struck him real hard. He flew into the four-way intersection, clearly shocked by the pain, and his head got crushed under a truck passing by that didn't slow down in time. It looked like a watermelon exploding. It's crazy seeing a full-on human who has existed for decades just stop existing in a few seconds. I worked in an office above a black spot intersection where people frequently walked out in front of traffic because one section of road was two-way traffic when everyone assumed it was one-way. They had signs and warning lights, but it kept happening. Every time it'd throw them clear into the middle of the intersection, even at inner-city stop/start traffic speeds. We were 14 floors up, so we didn't see anything graphic, but it almost became a joke when someone would look out the window and go, "Look, there's another one." And they'd be in the exact same spot. From what we could tell from the news, they all survived but with broken legs/ribs, probably terrible and maybe life-changing injuries, but no outright deaths. After a few years of that, they completely changed the entire nearby road and intersection as it was the only way to stop people getting hit by cars, but they labeled it traffic flow improvements. Driving a friend and his family to airport, he is an doc and I am not, we watch a trail of motorcyclists, who group of them out for a ride. Anyhow, one of the guys goes up, hits the side of a truck and then cracks his head wide open, at highway acceleration speeds and goes end over end with no upper part of his skull. Two other motorcyclists stand there with sheet or something to block view. Hard to miss the reddish-pink brain stain on the highway. I worked at a hospital when I was younger. Food service, delivering food trays to the patients. I walked into one of the psych rooms unknowingly. There was a crazy lady sitting in a chair holding a bedpan full of feces. And let me tell you, when I say crazy, this woman had a look in her eye that I haven't ever seen and don't ever want to see again. She said, "If you don't get out of my dwelling, I'm gonna throw shit on you, little boy." I've never been so freaked out in my life. Needless to say, I dropped the tray and ran out. Not a unique experience, but one I didn't want to have. NSFL, 90s, I was in 5th or 6th grade, hanging out at a friend's house when his uncle, who was maybe 19 or 20 at the time, called us into their living room. He sat us down and popped in a videotape for all of us to watch. It was some bootleg version of what he called Faces of Death, but from synopsis I've read, nothing I saw matches the descriptions. I was horrified and frozen from the peer pressure as we watched video of people jumping from burning buildings and bouncing, a public hanging where the guy doesn't die immediately so people start tugging on his body to break the neck, just multiple videos of people dying, being killed. The worst part, my friend and his uncle were laughing like they were watching AFV or something. I didn't watch all of it. After a few of the clips my disgust overcame my fear and the peer pressure. I told them they were sick for enjoying watching that video and I ran out of the house. I puked on my way home and those images have never left my brain. I worked for defense lawyers and they represented a very high-profile, prolific serial killer in our area. We once got a ton of boxes back from storage so they could look for something. I looked in a box labeled pictures and once I started looking I couldn't stop. I swear I didn't sleep for a week. I was just jogging one morning when my leg starts to hurt, so I decide to turn back and take shortcut. It's this abandoned factory area, faster to go through than go around. Just when I'm about to go into area from the fence hole, I hear weird noises coming from that direction, so I stop and try to look what is going on there, which probably was pretty lucky for me. There is two homeless guys sucking the Mario mushrooms of each other's, you figure out the details. And then there is a third guy filming it and doing the monkey smashing with the hand he's also holding a gun. You become pretty great at sneaking away when you don't want to be part of some weird tool triangle. And the leg pain. What leg pain? Dad thought I was asleep and our only computer at the house was at my room. Woke up in the middle of night to see titties on my computer and didn't understanding what's going on. Or the time when he was suicidal and hanged a rope on the top of his room, which I saw when I went to the bathroom. All this shit happened before I was 11 and didn't get better from here. I was trying to find my BB gun my parents took away and found their death certificate from my beloved uncle who had died of cancer a decade earlier. The cause of death said cerebral laceration. That's how I found out he actually shot himself. Heartbreaking for a 15-year-old. Watched a gangland show, saw an interesting tattoo and the location that would identify someone as having been in a particular gang and served time. Thought nothing of it. Literally the next Monday, I'm offloading equipment for a job and as I pass a piece of gear to one of the new freelancers I see the exact tattoo in the exact place in the show. He sees me, recognize what it is, and for a very short, very chill moment we pause. Then I grab the next piece of gear and decide to stop watching gangland shows. My friends cutting each other then drinking each other blood. I think it was a kink of theirs because they ended up dating and now they're happily married. During my time in Iraq, I spent some time manning our vehicle's weapon system. So we're sitting there at the night and I'm rotating the joystick and scanning for whatever. I see some movement in a farm field of sorts and zoom into a guy, a goat. Okay, I don't talk about this, ever. But I'm just going to go ahead and say mine, my neighbor's suicide. I was only like 9 and it was, I've been told, death by shotgun to the face. I say I've been told because my mind has blocked most of it out. I can remember walking up the steps and opening the door and then nothing. The closest thing I can remember after that was my mom holding me and rocking back and forth. I can also remember the smell, not sure if it's the smell I smelled that day, but sometimes, when the memory of walking up those steps is brought to mind, I get a faint smell in my nose. It's almost like the smell of cut meat and blood and pine wood. I was put into therapy for a while after it, but I can't remember much of that besides playing games. In my late teens, my therapist tried to get me to remember what I blocked out. It didn't work, and I decided that I couldn't remember for the simple fact that I wasn't supposed to see that. Which is why I never speak of it. Even my friends I grew up with don't know about it. Not see but hear. I was studying at the university library next to a guy who was listening to what I assumed to be music. He left to go to the bathroom, and when he took off his headphones I could hear that he was listening, very loudly, to some sort of Animal Alimone compilation. When I was 10 years old in India, I was looking through the backseat window of a car as we were driving through an accident traffic jam. I could see the body lying in the street covered with a small tarp. As we passed, the wind blew the tarp and I could see that there was just a torso. The head area had been completely flattened by the tire of the truck that ran over it. Still have that picture in my head. I was working in an office at the bottom of an apartment building. I was out having a smoke between phone calls and I heard a noise from above and I looked up to see a middle-aged woman coming straight down. I put my back against the wall and just watched the impact as it made a sound I'll never forget. I walked up to her to see if there was anything I could do, but I knew right away by her color and pool of blood forming beneath her I couldn't, so I ran in and called 911. Police arrived and I filled a report, closed up the office and went home. The very next morning on my way to my other job I saw a person walking on the side of the highway. Maybe 10 minutes later I heard on the radio a pedestrian was struck on the same highway I was just on, so yeah, that was pretty weird. Many years ago, when the Ninja motorcycles were really getting popular, the guy I was dating wanted one really bad. It was all he would talk about for weeks. His dad was a cop and knew his son was too stupid to ever safely operate a bike like that and wanted to turn him off of his obsession with a bike, so he got a hold of some footage of a crash on a Ninja. It was a young man and woman. Both were wearing shorts, t-shirts, flip-flops, no helmets. They must have hit the wall at 100 miles per hour. The camera did a close-up of the Ninja logo on the piece of motorcycle laying in the street, then surveyed the scene. The guy's face had hit the wall and just smeared along it for about a foot. It looked like someone had taken silly putty with a face on it and stretched it out. Unreal. The girl's whole body was just broken and her head was nowhere. Arms and legs dangling and pointing the wrong directions. A lot less blood than I expected. As the cleanup crew was putting her body in the body bag, tucking broken and flailing limbs into it, one of them said to the other guests, "Physical therapy is out of the question." When I was in primary school I saw a strayed mama cat and her baby. My family had dogs since I was a kid, so I learned to never approach when mama animal just had baby. I was observing mama licking baby's head at the distance while suddenly I heard crunching noises. I wasn't sure what was going on at first, then at one point I saw that the baby no longer had head. I was scared of cat for many years after that. At an anime convention a guy snuck behind my friend, bent down, and took a close-up shot of her butt. I ran to him, his friend with him sprinted away, but I caught the guy that took the photo. I made him go to the photos and delete it, but I remembered deleted photos are saved to recently deleted, so I made him navigate there to permanently delete it. He had hidden hundreds of non-consensual photos there. You could tell, they were all at inappropriate angles of girls not looking. He left quickly after that. I'm too small to detain myself, and I told security about it and described them. Hopefully they were found and kicked out, but probably not. I never saw either boy again. They were probably 18 to 21 years old. Edit. To be clear, I'm not a hero at all here, he only deleted the photo of my friend's butt. I should have made a huge screaming scene at the time when I saw the hundreds of other photos. I think I was too shocked and he left in a rush literally right after. I feel really bad he left with all those photos, and I hope they didn't end up on sites, especially since a lot of cosplayers at these cons are underage. I don't know if the friend who got away was doing the same thing. Not me, but my wife. Our first apartment was on the ground level with our windows looking out on a brick-paved courtyard. She was at home in the living room, taking care of 2 toddlers, home daycare, when there was a loud sound from out in the courtyard and she felt a reverberation in our floor. She said it sounded like someone had dropped a heavy box from a height. She looked out the living room window to see what junk got tossed out a window or whatever. She couldn't really see anything, so she stepped out into the lobby and opened the door leading to the courtyard. That's when she saw the body of the man who had just jumped off the roof. My girlfriend and I were in the mall and there was a strange-looking guy sitting very suspiciously. I turned around to look at him as we passed and he was taking a picture of my girlfriend's butt. I later passed him again and he was scrolling through his phone looking at pictures of different girls in the mall he took all very young. I reported him to the security. I worked at a nursing home for nuns. Sometimes they would have Alzheimer's but be physically okay. I walked in on 2 nuns getting it on. I apologized, closed the door, and never mentioned it to anyone. When I wrote my progress note I said, "Patient unavailable." I was 16. A 10-year-old looking boy knocking on my window very calmly at 3 a.m. He wore a yellow shirt and I could see that his pant waistline was khaki. I slept on the 2nd floor of my parents' house. I later was diagnosed schizophrenic and see the same kid about once a month. Not too bad, but about a week ago I saw a dead body. He was laying awkwardly on the side of the road, and there was a crowd of people around him trying to hide his body from view. Not fun. It's not really a thing that I saw but a thing that I've witnessed. So it's about 10 p.m. on a summer night in Germany 1 year ago. I was hanging out with my friends at a pizza place. There was barely a car passing on the street and the pizza place was about to close and completely empty except us, so we got our pizzas and sat down behind the pizza place on a bench with a pretty clear view of the main road. A few minutes later I finish my pizza and go inside to dispose of the box that came in. I threw the box away and go back outside and boom. There was no one. My 3 friends that had just sat there seconds ago were fully vanished. So I just stand there on the sidewalk for like 10 seconds looking around to see if it's all just a prank but I can't see them hiding anywhere. So I go in the middle of the road and start having a look around. There's no one, no cars, no people, even the workers at the pizza place weren't at the counter anymore. Then I kinda freaked out and went inside the pizza place and went back out and everyone was back to where they were before the whole ordeal. To this day this gives me chills. Anyone have an idea of what could have happened? One morning I was waken up by someone using an angle grinder. I know it was my younger brother, he usually used that to cut stuff. Couple minutes later I heard a noise of liquid splashing only you hear in horror movies. I wasn't sure if it was a dream or not because I was half asleep. Seconds later my brother walked into my room holding his right hand with his other hand to not fell off his body, looked at me and told me to not let him die. I was in shock. I picked something, like a towel or I don't know what it was, and quickly put that around his arm and called 911, but I was so shocked I couldn't even talk for like a minute. I put myself together and told the operator what happened and waited for the ambulance. I don't know how long it took them to arrive, but all that time I sat there with my brother trying to keep him awake. I watched how slowly the light in his eyes faded. He passed out a few times. When the ambulance came I went out of the house to get some air while they did their stuff. First thing I saw was the angle grinder with the power cable cut off and a line of blood 2 meters long. There was no time for ambulance to get him to hospital fast enough, so they called a helicopter. My brother survived. He can move that arm and even carry stuff with it, but lost most of its dexterity, which sucks because he is right-handed. This happened 3 years ago. Not sure if it counts as creepy as such, but worth a mention anyway. This story is my earliest memory and part of why I have complex PTSD. So, I was young. It's hard to place an exact age, but 3 max. Me and my older brother and sister were playing in our lounge when a white transit van appeared outside. Honestly, I could paint you a picture of this because it's still so vivid. I remember the exact view out the front window, etc. 3/4 man in balaclavas exited the van with knives and broke down our front door. They came in the house, started beating my stepdad and held my mother up against the wall with a knife. I can see both vividly still now. My big sister, credit to her, acted immediately and got me and my brother, she was the eldest, so took charge her younger siblings, and to climb out the front window. The escape. We're out front just screaming that our mother was dead. Again, I vividly remember believing they had cut her throat. Then the men ran out, got back in their van and just drove away. Mother was okay, stepdad was beaten but okay. Me and my siblings were okay. We moved away that night, under cover of darkness. Those photographic memories are standout creepy to me. We were never told truly why this happened. I don't recall anyone ever speaking to us about it. Not even to explain why we had to move that night. Anyway, we moved away with nowhere to go. Ended up temporarily on a caravan site. Not long after that, my big sister's father, out of 4 siblings, just one shares the same father, arrived at the caravan site and took my sister away. We didn't see her again for over 10 years. She was just 6 when she left. What happened was social services had contacted her father to try and get info on where we were because they were deeply concerned we had all just vanished. Her father tracked us down, saw my sister traumatized by the white van incident and claimed custody of her. Mother let her go and didn't even try and fight for custody. My sister was moved across the country. We were told her father stole her. That was the only explanation. She was kidnapped is what we grew up believing happened to our sister who just disappeared. Mother knew where she was, didn't try and see her once, didn't keep contact. She just let her go and let us believe it was a kidnapping. I only know the truth now because of speaking to extended family and my sister in adulthood. My mother has no relationship anymore with me, or my children. I have too much anger that I can't let go of. Cutting her out was a way of protecting both myself and my children. If you made it to the end of the video, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share, and we will see you in the next video.